Hello. Hi, welcome to our next, I can't remember what number. I think this is class number 14 of Mesilat Yesharim. We are in chapter 11 studying the trait of nikiyut, or what was some of the cleanliness, but which is really a very bad translation for this purpose, or blamelessness, or doing things the right way. It was is perfection, right? So honoas dvarim. He's in the middle of discussing things that we frequently don't do right. Like we might think we don't. We fulfill a certain commandment, or we have a certain good trait, or we avoid certain bad things. But it's more than just avoiding the main thing. It's about the details. It's about doing it right in the details. So he gave many examples. He talked about stealing. So, like he said, a lot of us might not, run and grab things away from other people, but we still do plenty of things that are dishonest, that take advantage of others and cause other people loss. And then he talked about last week we discussed issues with eating and how important it is to recognize and understand the laws of what we are and aren't allowed to consume, or what we should or shouldn't consume, what's ethical to consume, the kosher laws, etc. And not just avoid the main things, but be careful about the details. And we talked about sexual indiscretions. And now he's talking about interpersonal matters, and he's going to discuss, and he's in the middle of discussing honoas dvarim, which means harming someone with words. Verbal oppression is one way of saying it. Causing someone pain by saying things that are inappropriate to them. So he mentioned we're in the middle of it, and last week we ended in the middle where he discussed honas dvarim. He gave an example of a Baal Tshuva, of someone who used to be not on such a great path. Let's say they were an alcoholic, or they were a drug user, or they used to be a criminal, but they've mended their ways. They've changed their ways. To go and tell them, oh, those kind of guys because you used to be one of them. Things like that embarrass him. And he talked about honas dvarim. Another example of a different type of causing people pain was if somebody's suffering, telling them, what sin did you commit that made you deserve this, kind of thing. So that's where we're up to. He just mentioned that. So in the Hebrew, it's going to read now, Ukvar Amru Zichronam Levracha. Our rabbis already said, they told us that Gadol Honas Devarim Me Honas Mamon. Harming someone with words is even worse than harming someone in money, in a monetary matter. So obviously you're not allowed to, rip someone off, which is the typical way of honas mamon, charging someone much more than they should pay. But words is even worse, because in the Torah it says Shezen Nemarbo, and one of them it says V'yaresa me'alecha. When it warns us against harming someone with words, it says you should have fear of God. All right, and Bezel lo Nemarbo V'yaresa me'alecha. And when it talks about stealing, it doesn't use that terminology. So the Torah itself uses a terminology when it's discussing honas dvarim, harming with words, that's even harsher than the terminology the Torah uses when it talks about stealing somebody's things. And one could understand, when you harm someone with words, you can't repay them. You can't give them a refund. The harm is done, and it's there, and it lasts forever. You can never take it back. But kol shekain imhu barabim, and certainly if someone does this in public, shebehed yashaninu, that it says clearly, hamalbim penei chaveru barabim. And by the way, some of the quotes he's about to give here brings up a topic which we discussed a little last week, and that was sometimes the rabbis will use terminology that makes something sound very extreme, and it's kind of a way to make a point. It's not meant to be taken literally, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Someone who embarrasses his friend in public, he has no portion in the world to come. Now, obviously, such a person hopefully can make amends. He can, does it really mean he'll never have a portion of the world to come? Or it's a way of saying that it's such a terrible thing. And it's very difficult to make amends, to really, truly apologize and make amends, because, the harm is done. Rav Chisda said, Kol hasha'arim ninalu, all of the gates of heaven were closed, chutz misharei honah, except for the gates that are open to the one who cries to God because he was hurt by a verbal pain that somebody else caused him or her. The Yom Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Elazar also said, "Hakol Hakadosh Baruch Hu nifra al yidei shliach chutz me'ona." Everything God does through a messenger. The normal way of things is the person will get his due, but except for Hona, if you harm somebody else with words, God Himself, so to speak, comes and punishes you. V'yomru, it also says, Shlosha ein hapargod ninol b'fneim. There's three people that the curtain that curtains off the God's inner chambers it does not get closed in front of these people, and one of them is Hona, one of them a person who is harmed by someone else's hurtful words. Va'afilu lidvar mitzvah, even when it comes, and this is very interesting, even when it comes to a dvar mitzvah, doing something that you're supposed to do, such as hocheach tochiach esam misecha, right? You're supposed to give rebuke. You're supposed to criticize others when they're wrong, right? With good intentions, of course. If you see somebody making a mistake, doing something they shouldn't do, you're supposed to correct them, right? It's a mitzvah in the Torah. We're obligated to correct them. However, then it says in the same verse where it says you should correct your friend, it says, "V'lo tisa alav chet," and you should not then carry his sin. Now, the simple meaning of the verse is, because if you see somebody doing something wrong and you don't do something to correct them and help put them on the right path, then you're partly responsible for whatever bad it is that person is about to do or does, right? But another way of understanding this, Chazal teaches us, Yachol afilu panev mishtanos, what if by giving a rebuke in this instance, you will embarrass that person? And I'm sure many of us can think of situations in our lives when we were when somebody gets up, and making it as if he's doing a big mitzvah, rebuking somebody in public or rebuking somebody in such a way that it embarrasses him or her, right? Talmud Omer, the Torah says, "V'lo sisa alav chet." You should give rebuke, but don't sin while you're giving rebuke, right? You could criticize somebody, but not in such a way that you're going to hurt them. And that's so the prohibition against hurting someone extends this far, even when you're doing something that's in itself a good thing that you're supposed to do, but you're not supposed to do it in such a way that it hurts someone else. Mikol Eila HaMamarim, from all of these examples for these sayings that I stated, Tira, you should see Ad Hechan Mispashtim Anpei HaZarazos, just how far the branches of this sin extend, the kama anshakasha, and how harsh is the punishment for someone who engages in honas devarim, in causing people hurt and shame, with their words. So, and then there's another mitzvah in the Torah, which he's going to mention, the famous mitzvah of lifnei iver lo titein mechshol, but literally translates, before a blind person, do not put a stumbling block, which obviously it means literally that, right? Of course, you shouldn't, and so if someone's, feeling around, if they're blind and they can't see, you shouldn't put a stumbling block, obviously. But what it's really referring to is lifnei, when it is talking about giving somebody advice. So here he tells us a little bit about giving someone advice. When it comes to regarding the issue of giving people advice, we learned in Medrash and Torah Kohanim, do not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. It's referring to someone who's blind about a particular issue. So somebody comes to you and they ask you advice, about a financial matter, because you happen to be an expert, or about this issue, or they need advice on how to fix something in their house, or they need advice on a relationship issue, or whatever it is. They come to you because they trust you and your knowledge on the issue, and they don't have that knowledge. So regarding this issue, they are like a blind person, right? Amar lacha. So if someone is asking whether a certain person is worthy of marriage to a priest, so, some people are not. And don't say that she is, and then get somebody into a messy situation where they're trying to build a relationship that's not right for them. Or if someone's asking you, don't give them advice that's inappropriate for them. Bial tomarlo, don't tell him, give him advice. For example, this would be a blatant example. A guy comes to you who and he's asking you a financial question, and you say, "Hey, there's going to be a big need for donkeys next week because I don't know, some convention's coming to town, and there's going to be you need a lot of donkeys to carry things around town, right? That's the old-fashioned equivalent of a van, of a a delivery van, right? So sell your field so that, and then buy yourself a donkey with the money, and you're giving him as if this is good advice, right? But meanwhile, vi'ata okef alav v'not lamimenu, and then but you're only saying that because you want to buy his field, right? So clearly, Shema Tomar. But what if you say to yourself, but it's true, right? The advice that I'm giving him is actually good advice. Like it's true that I want the field. It's true that I want to gain something from this. But that's not the whole reason why I'm doing it. I'm sorry, I'm just silencing my phone so it doesn't beep again. But I'm actually giving him good advice. So you got to be really careful. Shari Hadavar Masr Lalev, because only you really know deep inside what's going on when you're giving him this advice. And that's why it says regarding this, you should have fear of God. Ani Hashem, I am God. And we see from this that we learn whether it is something that it's even possible that you might be have a personal interest involved, or something that you may not have any personal interest involved. You need to make sure that you give good, solid advice to someone that comes to you ala emes hazach v'abar, in a clear and pure manner, and not mixing in your own best interests, right? So, and if you can't, it's best to be quiet. It's best to not give advice. If you feel like the advice you give may be tainted by your own personal interest, then we all know this, from politicians who make decisions, and they might give sometimes good reasons as to why it's in the public interest, but they also are making a profit on this side. So how could they then honestly say that they're really doing it in the public's best interest? And that's what the Torah means when it says, so again, that follows along with the whole idea of nikiyut. Give good advice, but really, really, really be careful. Don't just be able to say that you give good advice so that it sounds good in your video clip, but it has to actually be really good advice that you're giving in an honest and pure manner. V'tira sha'amda Torah al sof datam shalom. The Torah understood how tricky, deceitful people are really thinking. The Torah understood exactly what they're going. When the Torah says "Lifnei iver lositein mechshol lav b'shuftani asikina she'iatzu eitza sharasa mefursamas v'nigleis." The Torah is obviously not telling us, it's not dealing with idiots, right, who are going to give advice that's obviously bad. Like tell a guy, take a can of gasoline and light it up in your living room or something. Like obviously bad advice is not what the Torah is telling you not to give. That's pretty obvious. The Torah doesn't need to tell us that. It's talking to people that are intelligent enough, lahara, in order to do evil to making it look good. That's what the Torah is really telling you. We don't need a verse in the Torah to tell us, not to give clearly, obviously bad advice. They're going to give advice to their friends that on the surface, right, there may actually be a profit to this friend of theirs. There may actually be something that he's going to gain out of this. But in the end of the story, in the long run, it's not really for his benefit. It actually is going to be bad for him. But it's going to end up being only good for the guy giving the advice. And of course, I'm sure all of us can think of times in our lives when we were recipients of such wonderful advice. And hopefully we haven't ever given such advice. But to be honest, when people ask us things, we have to be very careful, because deep down there may be a personal self-interest in the outcome, and we need to be open and honest about these things. Al-Kain Amru. Therefore, the rabbis tell us, Shema Tomer, you might think to yourself, I'm giving him good advice, right? But however, you should know that it's deep down in your heart is the only place. You're the only one that really knows if it's truly being given in good faith. And how often are so many people on a daily basis constantly falling into this trap? Because they're constantly going after and running after the desire for profit. Obviously, with the main thing he's thinking here is in business. And this happens all the time. And how many times in business can all of us really look at ourselves and tell us with 100% honesty that when I gave this person advice, I did not have my own best interest in mind? I know as a physician, this is obviously, people criticize doctors all the time, and sometimes with legitimate reason. Of course, he wants you to get this procedure because he's going to get paid for that procedure. And one of the ways I try to deal with this in my own practice, and I don't know if it's perfect, but is to be honest with the patient and say, listen, right, I'm a surgeon, right? So, there's 5 ways you can deal with this problem. There's this way, this way, this way, this way, and there's surgery. I'm advised. I think surgery is the best idea, but you should understand I'm being upfront about my own biases here, right? And if you can put it out there, then at least you're being open and honest, right? So and then you say, okay, and now let's go through all of the options and let's see which one do you think is right for you, and do your best at being as objective as you can possibly be. But at least if you're honest about it, at least you can get past that. And I think if we all do that in our work, whatever we do, there's times when these things are relevant, and we really have to keep that in our mind. This is the duty of any honest person. He's really emphasizing this hard because this is a really important issue to him. If somebody comes to ask you advice, right? You have to think, what is the advice that you would actually give to yourself? Patients sometimes ask me, what would you do if it was you? Now, since I'm a man and I'm an OBGYN, sometimes usually it's impossible for me to give such advice. But I do often, they say, well, what if it was your mother? Or what if it was your sister, right? What would you say? Or your daughter, for that matter? So and that's valuable to people because they understand that you're really trying to put yourself in their shoes and give them what's right for them advice, as opposed to what's in some way beneficial to the advisor. You should not be thinking about anything else other than what's the benefit of the person who's receiving the advice. Not for any other purpose, and no matter how obvious or how distant of a possible maybe benefit there might be, right? Even if the benefit's tiny, I don't get paid anymore by this surgery or that surgery. Hey, there might be a little benefit because people, I don't know, I might be experienced in using this new cool machine or something like that. So a little benefit. Little benefits are also benefits, and you really have to try to knock out any personal benefit at all. But what about a case? And here's some advice. Well, what if I told this person to do what's really best for him or for her, it would come out harming me, right? And I'm sure we could think of such scenarios. If you're in business, right, and a guy comes to you and he says, you're in a diamond business, and a guy says, the guy down the block is selling this diamond for $10,000, and I'm telling you, and these things, that thing is worth $20,000. I can buy that thing, I could sell it in the city next door, and I can make a serious profit. And meanwhile, you were already on your edge. But should I get it? Because of whatever question he has, But by advising him to go buy it for 10, you're losing your own chance, right? You're harming yourself, right? I don't know if that's the best example, but I think it's an okay example. But we can all think of cases where advising someone else to do what's best for them may work out to your detriment. Now you're really in a bind, right? So if such a situation should happen, so im yachol lahochiach oso al panav shel hamisya'etz, right? Sheyochicheu. If you can tell the guy, listen, it's best for you to do that. But if you did that, you'd be harming me. So in certain scenarios, you can be totally honest, right? And upfront, right? So in the best case scenario, just be completely honest. Tell the guy, listen, you want to buy that house, at the price they're giving it to you, that's the best deal you're going to get. Go for it, right? But just I want you to know that my son-in-law was looking at the same house, and they were going to put in a bid tomorrow. So if by buying it, you're going to take that opportunity from it, right? So you're being open, and then the guy can make whatever decision he makes on his own, but at least you were open and honest. So that would be the best case scenario, right? But if you can't do that, either because you just don't have the inner strength to do it, or because you'd cause a big fight. You can all imagine scenarios where saying such a thing might make things even worse in a situation that's already bad, right? So at least yistalik min hadavar lo yitzio. Tell him, I'm sorry, I can't give advice in this matter. And you can even say, like a judge, a judge can recuse himself, right, of a case or herself, because I have a personal involvement in this matter, so I don't belong being the one judging this thing, and that's totally acceptable. That's better than playing games and trying to be as honest and objective as you can when you can't actually be objective. And even if you are objective, no one's ever going to believe you that you were really objective. It's a situation that the best thing to do sometimes is just to put up your hands and say, sorry, I can't advise you. But better than lying, or better than giving advice. But absolutely never give the person advice that the purpose of the advice ends up being something that's anything other than the best interest of the person asking. With the exception of a case where sometimes a guy is asking advice, but he has a devious intention, right? He wants to do bad, and he's asking you how to get away with something that's illegal, or he's asking you how to do harm to somebody. He says, my friend, the neighbor, I can't stand the guy. I don't like the way, whatever, and I want to know the best way to destroy his fence without getting caught. So then give him bad advice in that case, it's a kvar nemar, because it says, then it's certainly a good deed, a mitzvah to trick the guy. Assuming you can't confront him directly. Like, if you can confront him directly or send him to the police, all power to you. But there are situations where that may not be a viable option. So if you can trick the guy so that he doesn't harm someone or do something bad, as it says, with the devious person, be devious. And the story of Chushai Ha'arki in Shmuel is an example of that. So this is this. So we talked about two things so far tonight: Honoas Dvarim, doing someone harm, and how terrible that is. And then he talked about giving advice. Any comments on giving advice before we continue?
I just wanted to ask. The only time that Hashem says in the Torah, I think, that it is so terrible that I will pay special attention, is when somebody takes a collateral that is necessary for sleeping in. Nayaki Itzak Elai, right?
Right.
It doesn't say that about Onad Dvarim, so I was just wondering if Ramchal...
That's an interesting question. I wonder if remember he said there's three things that the curtain, the paragod, the curtain that cordons off God's upper chambers, and this was one of the three, but he didn't quote the whole one. I wonder if that's one of the other one. We have to look that up. I didn't look it up before tonight.
Okay. So what's the... Just tell me the reference, because I don't have the book with me.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you in a second. It's Bava Metzia. No. The Ramchal is the Kol Ha'Sharim Ninalu Chutz Misharei Hona. That's Bava Metzia Nun Tes Amud Aleph, 59a. And the one about the paragod is also in Bava Metzia Nun Tes Amud Aleph. Let's just see that Gemara there, and see that would be where you'd find it.
Thank you.
Okay. Jeff?
Yeah. This is a real case. 93-year-old uncle.
Okay.
Proxy healthcare. He's in hospice, and it's the end of his life, basically. But he's been trying so hard to exercise and do something. He has some hope he can maybe recover, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
well founded. So he asked the hospice nurse, am I going to get better?
Okay.
Uh, and she says no. Um,
Okay.
and he dies 2 weeks later. And I've asked many other people in this field, are you really, did the hospice worker do the man justice? Because if she had lied and
Right.
said, uh, only God knows, we don't know
Mm-hmm.
these things, but she knows that he will not get better. So, how do you think that those principles we just read applies under those circumstances where um, she felt duty bound to tell the truth, but the result was that this man had just lost all hope?
Wow.
Well, how do you know that was the reason that he died, that he lost all hope? I mean, I
Because
understand.
he's my uncle. I was his only relative. I spoke to him
Oh,
many
okay. So you,
times, and I was there during this exchange, and I could understand why felt she felt he was entitled to know the truth. And I've asked other hospice workers, and they've said, "Well, you have to moderate it by the circumstances, and basically not telling the truth is the way a number of them would handle that situation."
So, first of all, he's going to discuss telling the truth in a couple pages. We probably won't get to it tonight. Truth telling, and we may get some insight when we study that together. But I can tell you from my own experience as a physician, thankfully, it's rare that I'm faced by a situation of life or death in the sense of, God forbid, one of my patients passing. Although occasionally I might have such situation with the baby, but I do pretty frequently have situations where I know someone's going to miscarry. You know, and happens pretty often actually. And the woman really doesn't want to lose hope, and I am stuck between, do I tell her honestly that this is not going to it's not going to work, right? Or the chances are extremely, extremely, extremely small, or do I keep on encouraging her? I'll tell you what I do in almost all cases is I do everything I can to be honest, but that's a decision that I made over the years. Whether it's the right or wrong decision, I don't know. You know, there are certainly some times when I'm in a situation with a patient and I feel like if I tell her the truth, she's just going to get mad. She's not going to listen, you know, and she's going to walk out the door. And it's not so much that I'm afraid of losing a patient. It's just I know that if she walks out the door, she's not going to get the care that she needs, you know, and 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 um so in those cases I might color it, tilt it a little bit, make it a little bit rosier than it really is, but I really try my best to tell the truth, you know.
Okay.
And but I don't know, like I've had situations, I've had these discussions in ethics discussions during my training, especially, like, sometimes you have families in certain cultures where when an elderly person is sick with a terminal illness, that they don't tell the person, and they come to the doctor and say, "We don't want you to tell our bubby that she has cancer and she's going to die in a few months, right? Don't tell her. It's better that she'll be happy, and when she dies, she dies. And until then, let's let her be." And it's some of these ethical questions can be really thorny. I
I've,
mean, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say I've dealt with patients that, and I'm a therapist, so in
Mhm.
rehab where they're really could go not go, and I think you, especially when people want hope, even when their situation may be hopeless, because oftentimes I was stuck with you have to plan for certain things, and
Mhm.
is that you can still plan, but we never know. And that's you're always left. I'm surprised the nurse didn't say, but you never know, because that's the truth. We've seen people rally when they weren't supposed to. They were supposed to die and they didn't, and we've seen other people who were supposed to live and they died. So the truth is, you got to be realistic, I think, and you have to tell people the truth, but you can always say, but we really don't know.
Aren't you convincing yourself to go down the path of dissembling, because if you said, okay, 99% chance you're going to die, but 1% you might live, because who
Well,
knows?
there's 100% chance you will die. 100% chance you're going
Yes,
to die.
true. Right.
When you're going to die. I mean, you
Okay,
can also
fair
use a little humor,
Okay.
especially with a 93-year-old who's not doing well.
No.
And I have an aunt who's 95 right now we're dealing with. So, do you say, well, you're going to die anyway? Or do you say, but you don't know. You work at what we don't know 100%. But 100% you will die at some point. Yes.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, I totally see this because this happens to me a lot, and usually not in the age of a person. Like I said, a situation of losing a pregnancy is usually where it happens in my case. And I'll say 90, these are the statistics, and in this kind of situation. I've never seen it go any other way, and then if the person insists on holding on to hope, I'm not going to argue with them and say, no, don't hope.
Right.
I'll say, if your hope, if a miracle can happen, okay, it'll be a miracle, but go for it. And I don't say it in a sarcastic way either. I may have come out a little bit like that now, but
well, the other thing is the context, I think,
Yeah.
because if you're going into hospice and the patient himself knows he's going into hospice,
Mhm.
Right.
I think he has some knowledge of the fact that hospice means, by definition,
Right.
an end of life process.
Right.
So that should maybe set that person up to know that, okay, well, I'm probably not getting better here. There's a chance I could get better, but probably I'm not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And we'll continue this discussion when he talks about sheker, when he talks about lying, which is like 2-3 pages from here, depending on which book you have, I guess. But he's gonna he has a few other subjects to cover. And right now he's talking about interpersonal mitzvot or averot, depending on which perspective, sins or good deeds. But so he talked about honoat varim, and he talked about lifnei iver, right? Lo sitein milshal, giving advice. So the next one he's going to talk about is, as you can imagine, a big one, and that is the subject of the related two subjects of rechilot, which is often translated as tale bearing, usually associated with somebody that walks around telling stories about everyone else, right? And typically, rechilot refers to true stories, right? Versus lashon hara, which is the second category, which is slander, which generally, not 100%, but generally is associated with saying bad things about other people, which may or may not be true, or often not true. They might have some truth to them, but rechilot doesn't have anything to do with the truth. It's just randomly a guy that's constantly going around telling stories about other people. Sometimes good stories, but always telling stories about other people, right? So that's rechilot and lashon hara, both of which are lavin in the Torah. They're prohibitions. Well, so he's going to talk about those now. Kvar chomro noda. Its severity is well known. Vigodel anafav, and the greatness of all of its branches, the complexity. Some of you may have had the chance in your life to study the Sefer Chafetz Chaim, who goes through in detail an entire book detailing every little detail about this particular sin. So if you want to study the branches, that'll probably be your go-to book. But in the meantime, it's well known that it's very broad, and it's very there's a lot of there's the basics and there's a lot of details. Ad shekvar gazru, to the extent that the Omer Chachamenu Zichron Levracha, till the rabbis decreed b'mamar shekvar askarti, when they mentioned something that I mentioned before, but kulam, when it said that most people do gazel, steal in some way, shape, or form. Some people do arayot, it's sexual indiscretions, right? But everyone does avak lashon hara. Everyone is going to sin in this category in some form of speaking slander about others. And we all do it. And we all do avak lashon hara. We might not stand up in the middle and say, you know what I saw him doing last night? We might not do it so blatantly, but in conversation, there's innuendo, there's well, it's not really a bad thing. There's all kinds of reasons and excuses we make for ourselves what to say whether it's in the context of work or school or in the shul or our friends, about other people. So v'amru, and they said, now, Hechi dami avak lashon hara. What does it mean, avak? Avak literally means the dust, or the of lashon hara. It's like, it's not really lashon hara, but it's the a trace of it, right? Kugon de Amar, for example, when somebody asks, somebody's walking around, where can I find the fire? In those days, it might not be so easy. They didn't have matches. If you want to find somebody has a fire in their house, so you can go get from there to light it. So somebody's walking around. So, but this guy says, hey, you want to know where to find a fire? Ela Bay Planya. You go to his house. He's always cooking over there, right? So it doesn't even sound like something bad, right? So the Gemara over there, if you look at it, the Gemara says, well, what's wrong with that? He's asking you where the fire is, and you told him. So the Gemara explains that it's talking about when you say it in such a way as to say, he's always cooking, like he's rich, he's always making feasts, he's always making parties, that kind of thing. Right? So it might not sound bad, but the truth is it could be bad. First of all, people will go bother him because they're going to be constantly knocking on his door asking for fire, right? And you're making him sound like he's some kind of big shot that's always making big parties. And so people can take it in a negative way. It's avak lashon hara. And we do things like this all the time. All right. Or you stand up in a room where everyone in this room can't stand this guy. And you sit in there and you talk about how great the guy is, right? You know that in this context, that's just going to engender more hatred. People are going to say, that guy, you're telling me he's good, he's the guy. All you're doing is stirring up more hatred by doing that, right? And we could think of such situations that we're all guilty of, unfortunately, all the time. And there are any similar things where what you're saying might not necessarily seem bad, but it's still avak lashon hara, it's still evil speech, it's still slanderous. Even though it seems like it's an easy thing, it seems like it's not serious, it seems like it's mild and it's distant from the guy who's walking around telling stories. I'm not like him, but did you know what happened last night? And that's the way we all fall into that trap. But the truth is that they are like traces of avodah zarah, of lashon hara. The rule is harbe drachim liyetzer. Our evil inclinations, the little guy in our mind, our id, is always telling us, whatever you want to call it, whatever psychological construct you're going to use. But that part of our psyche, that part of our personality that constantly tries to justify that which we do, that constantly tries to tell us that what we're doing is okay, right? He has lots of ways to convince us that what we're about to say is a good thing, right? And we should be careful. We have to remember that any kind of speech, and this is the golden rule when it comes to lashon hara. Think for a minute. Is it possible that harm will come from what you're saying? If the answer to the question is yes, then you better not say it. That's the bottom line. If it's possible that harm or some sort of shame can come to someone else, whether the guy is there or whether he's not there, that is included in evil speech. Hasanoi, which is hated, and is disgusting before God. That such a person, it is said about him, and these are some more very hyperbolic sounding statements. Call him misaper lashon hara. Anyone that says lashon hara kilu kofer b'ikar, as if he's denying the truth, the ikar meaning the truth of the existence of God, or the basic principles of monotheism. Ukroksiv, and the verse says miloshni b'seisere'ehu, one who secretly slanders in secret his friend. Oso atzmis, that person I will destroy. That's a verse in Tehillim and Psalms. So we see how severe this kind of sin is. So now, so he doesn't go into the details of lashon hara that much, but he gives us a rule, which I think is something that it's an easy way to remember. You can either learn the Sefer Chafetz Chaim and get every single detail, but if you don't have time, if you don't have the patience to learn every detail, then just remember what the Ramchal said. Think, is it possible that someone else will be harmed or shamed by this speech? If the answer is yes, then keep your mouth shut and move on. Period. That's the way it is. So it's a pretty easy to remember rule. And no matter how many justifications are bouncing around your head, ask yourself again, is it possible? And if the answer is yes, don't say it. So the next one is the next thing is, we know lo sisna, we're also told in the Torah not to hate others, right? And we're not also lo sikom, lo sita, we're not allowed to take revenge or bear a grudge, right? So which is obviously closely related to so he's going to talk a bit now about these two sins of hating someone else, the desire for revenge, or worse, actually taking revenge, or natira, bearing a grudge, or acting in such a way that you bear a grudge. So these things are also kashya mode, very severe. L'sheyimolet mimeno lev hutal asher levnei adam, right? And it's very hard, right? That's for somebody to get away, right, from that which our heart, right, desires, right, which it's something that's ingrained in our hearts to want to take offense, right, when somebody hurts you, and to hate that person, and it's ingrained in our souls, in our very being as human beings, to want to take revenge, right? Everyone, we all naturally feel really deep down. We feel when we're insulted, and it causes us a terrible amount of emotional pain. And to that person who is hurt, his revenge is sweeter than honey, right? We have this natural desire to take revenge when somebody hurts us, right? That's the only way, right, a person gets rest from his hatred, from his desire for revenge, is taking revenge, right? Or it's not the only way that we can, but it's the only way our natural inclination is to do this, right? So therefore, if a person can have the strength to forsake that which his very nature is pushing him to do, right? And to be forgiving, and not to hate the person who inspired that hate within you by doing something against you. For a person to overcome that desire of and then by overcoming that hatred, then not taking revenge against him, especially in a case where the opportunity arose that he could have taken revenge, right? Not bear a grudge, but rather he forgets it and he puts it aside, and he removes it from his heart, that feeling of hatred, as if it didn't happen. That person is a very strong and powerful person. To overcome hatred for someone else is an extremely difficult, and it's unnatural. That's the one main thing that he emphasized over and over again here, is that it's against our natural inclination. The human being, we're wired that way. When somebody hurts us, we want to take revenge, and it's very, very difficult to say, no, I'm going to forgive him, I'm going to move on, and I'm not going to hold that grudge, right? It's only angels, spiritual beings, for them it's easy. They don't have these interpersonal traits, character traits that we have. But this is not easy for those that live in these physical bodies that we have, that are built out of earth. However, it is a decree from God himself, from the king himself, which is interesting, because he's saying that God is asking us to act against our natural inclinations, which is a very powerful idea. A lot of the other mitzvot, they might take a lot of work, they might be hard, they might be difficult for various reasons, they might be expensive, they might be whatever. But here it's God, by telling us not to take revenge and not to even keep hatred in our hearts that would lead us to revenge, is asking us to do something that's really against our very nature as a human being. And there are clear psukim, there are clear verses in the Torah. So don't argue with me and say that it's not true, because Einam Tzrichim Perish, they don't need, there's no commentary necessary on these verses. They're explicit in their meaning. Lo sisna asachicha bilvavecha, do not hate your brother in your heart. Lo sikom, do not take revenge. Do not bear a grudge those people that are your people. So don't argue with me and say it's okay to want to take revenge and to hate, because it's very clear in the verse that you're not supposed to hate. So what does this mean, Nikima and Natira? What's the difference between bearing a grudge, excuse me, and Nikama and taking revenge? And he's going to explain this to us, not just because he wants to explain the difference between the two, which would be the job of Chazal, which they do teach us, and he's going to quote them in a minute. But it also illustrates his main point in this chapter of Nikiyut, right? Because here the Torah tells us, don't take revenge. And also, you might think, okay, you shouldn't take revenge, but to bear a grudge is okay, right? So the Torah is telling us, no, you have to go above and beyond that. And that's what Natira is. And I'll explain what that means as the Ramchal does. The Hainu. What does this mean? Nikima, revenge, is limana mehetiv limisha lo ratzal lo o she'er lo kfar. A guy didn't do you a favor, so you don't do it to him. So in other words, take revenge. Right? He didn't help you when you needed help, so you're not going to help him when he needs help, right? Or he did something bad to you, you're going to go do something bad to him. Unatira is a step above that, right? Lahazkir be'eshu humetiv l'misha herolo ezazikaron minarash asalo. It's to say to him, yeah, last time you didn't lend me that thing, right? I'm going to lend it to you, but remember, you didn't do it for me, right? That's bearing a grudge. So that you might actually think, right? And he's going to say, our inclinations, our inner character, our inner, our inclinations in our heart are to tell us ourselves, it's trying to say, no, don't forgive that guy. There's got to be a little bit of hatred left in you, right? So we need to do something, right? So, don't forget completely that you were hurt once, right? You remember it's deep down. You'll never actually forget it. So, if you're trying to work on yourself and you're not going to go and take revenge, you're trying to forget it a little bit, right? He keeps trying. The Yetzer Hara keeps trying to tell us, keep a little bit of a memory. Don't forget completely what that guy did to you. Keep it in the back of your mind. Right? Yomar derech mashal adam. Right? So it's going to tell the person that little inner devil inside of us is going to tell us, you know what? I want you to not lend that guy. I want you to take actual revenge. But if you're not going to listen to me and you're going to go ahead and give it to him, at least, right? That thing that you needed, lefachos, at least don't give it to him with a smile, right? Right? Oh, if you don't want to harm him, at least don't do him a favor. Okay, so you don't want to go and smash his window because he smashed yours, right? But at least don't help him wash his windows, right? When he needs help, right? Don't help him, right? Oh, you know what? If he can't convince you, you know what? You're going to go and wash his windows. Okay, don't let him see that you're helping him, or go wash his windows, but don't go over to his house when he invites you over as a friend. Don't go watch the football game with him, right? Don't act like a friend. You know what? If you're going to forgive it, you're going to forgive him, so he won't be your enemy, but don't be his friend, right? But if you want to be his friend, so go ahead, go watch the football game, but don't have a beer. Don't give him, put your arm around his shoulder. Don't really act like a friend. Don't be as good a friend, right? So the Yetzer Hara is trying all kinds of ways to convince us to bear some sort of grudge, to never fully forgive and never fully put that bad blood behind us, right? Because this desire for revenge and the hurt that we feel is so deep, and the desire to hate someone else and harm that other person is so great within us. That's why the Torah said, and this is the real nice part of this. You should love your friend like yourself. Why does it say it? Why doesn't it say you should love your friend, right? Love your friend. That's not enough. I love all my friends. That's wonderful, right? No, but it has to be kamocha, because you can love your friend like any one of these other steps we just mentioned. You can love him, but because since you don't like him so much, you're not gonna really be that much of a friend. Or I'll do him favors, but I'll do them begrudgingly. Or any one of the levels of things that he mentioned before. So the Torah says, no, kamocha beli shum hefresh. You love him like yourself with no difference. The same way you would want someone to do it for you is the way you do it for him. Kamocha beli chilukim beli tachbulotim zimot kamocha mamash, literally like him, like yourself, like if it was yourself. This kind of a good stopping point. We have a couple minutes left for questions or comments, but I'll open the floor. But so this is he discussed now the issue of hatred, the issue of revenge and bearing a grudge, how important it is, and what the real meaning of ahavta l'reacha kamocha is, like truly like yourself. All right, go ahead, Yosef.
Yeah, I found out it says gezel, but it probably includes also this oshek because it's taking something that doesn't belong to you. So
yeah, that's true, right? It would definitely be under that category.
And the third one is avodah zarah, which is surprising because usually ben adam l'chavero is
more than
at least treated by Hashem as more important. There's so many examples where if there's a contradiction between the two, Hashem says, "I'm mochel my kavod," and right, like even cutting toilet paper on Shabbat is an example that I always give because it's you don't come to shul stinking and affecting other people's davening.
Okay. Yeah. Where we said before, Kila Kofer Be'ikr, I'm trying to remember the exact. If you what was that phrase? We talked. I'm going to slip in my mind, but yeah, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, stealing and yeah, it is interesting. We can think about that one. I see there's another hand up. Jeffrey, go ahead.
Aren't there some people, and I'll name a few, who are so vile, who've done such harm, who are so beyond redemption, that to love your neighbor as thyself is too extreme. It's too extreme. For example, if Vladimir Putin knocked on my door, I would have uncontrollable hatred of him because he has a million dead people on his conscience, and there are other people we could come up with, criminals who are mafiosa that do terrible things. Anyway, so I mean, it's a good model, but I wish there was a clear carve out to allow for total rejection because they don't deserve to be part of humanity.
Yeah, I was waiting for somebody to bring that up because that's the car when we talk. It sounds so wonderful to love your friend and love him like yourself and to forgive and it's all beautiful. But what if someone who's unforgivable? Because such things happen and I think that first of all, I think that the
Ramchal, it says Amcha. So only somebody that is actually mostly good. Like they obviously everybody makes mistakes. Everybody even sins willfully sometimes. But generally speaking, Putin is not somebody that is doing masam he's not somebody who's deserving. Like just the problem with I don't know about politicians, but the problem with regular people is that we sometimes say, oh, they're for sure not in this category. They can't be loved, but Hashem expects a little bit more, so that it's a very thin line, right? Like
Yeah, because like what Yosef is saying is that the Chazal do teach us that a person who's completely unrepentant, doesn't deserve to be treated, with that same level of respect, and in fact, it could be counterproductive. But the point is that the Ramchal he's emphasizing here a different aspect, right? He's emphasizing, a person, he's coming, he's your neighbor, he's coming to ask you, we should be forgiving. We should not, and also it shouldn't come from a place of hatred either. You know, it's understandable, and it would be too much to ask of somebody who really suffered at the hands of someone else, right? To completely let go of that hatred, right? But we are asked to do so in an ideal situation, to try our best to forgive. It's a value, but there are major exceptions, and you mentioned some of them. But what the Ramchal here is emphasizing, it's not the focus of this particular piece here. But there's certainly, Chazal recognize that someone's completely unrepentant and someone is continuing to do you harm, right? And refuses to admit his faults and refuses to stop doing harm. That obviously you're not expected to, you're not even supposed to, act with him like he's your best friend and start.
Let me ask you another example, which,
Yeah.
And this is a true story. It's been well documented.
Mhm.
Joseph Kennedy was the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain. And there's a story of a true story of a Polish father who stayed in front of the British embassy day after day after day in the hopes of appealing to the Joseph Kennedy to do something for his family that were trapped behind Nazi lines. And Joseph Kennedy was completely oblivious, didn't even give him the time of day. And so he cursed him. He said, may God show as much mercy on your children as you've shown to mine. And this, of course, the Kennedys don't have a good history. And so it surfaces, and I can send you the documentation this happened. Now, this is a guy who had a lot of power, and indeed he was totally unsympathetic and wouldn't do anything to help his children. So he cursed him. I can't blame this Polish father or grandfather, but he certainly wasn't following this kind of ethic of loving your neighbor as thyself, because of the damage he was doing. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the very high standard that this would, and whether it's good for civilization to have this kind of forgiveness for people who have power, like Joseph Kennedy, and refuse to.
Yeah, it's an it's the what you're asking and discussing is really the obvious counterweight to what Ramchal just said. I think it would be a good topic for a whole separate lecture, because there's a lot of literature on the subject. But this is the extreme loving side of the equation. But there's definitely a counterweight in Jewish literature, of someone who's deliberately evil and refuses to change their ways, refuses to listen. That these, like Yosef said, it's ose maise amcha. When your friend comes and he asks for forgiveness, you're supposed to be forgiving. You're not supposed to want to.
But how could you justify self-defense? For example, fighting for your country if you're invaded. You're dealing with young men and women. If you followed this, you would never kill a soldier in a combat situation where you're trying to defend yourself.
Yeah, so that's another exception. Self-defense is another exception. So there are definitely a lot of exceptions to this rule, and it's a complex area. Most of it we kind of intuitively know and understand what kinds of situations the Ramchal is talking about and what kinds of situations he's not. But we do need to remember, and I'm just going to emphasize this again because that's the point that Ramchal is trying to teach us tonight, is that we do have to overcome our natural inclination to hate someone that did us harm. And we do have to learn to try to reconcile and forgive and love them, and that is a value. Maybe not, in every situation, and maybe not to the extent that if they're continuing to do you harm, right, to allow them to do so. that might be an ethic in some in a different religion, but not in ours, right? But you know, and we all know people whose entire lives are consumed by never forgetting what somebody else, in Yiddish it's called broiges. I knew the word broiges from when I was a little kid. There's people in I don't want to, not close relatives of mine who would never forgive. They remembered that time when you said, and you didn't invite me to that. And for 30, 50 years, they're 1 foot in the grave, and they still remember the time that they were insulted. That's Ramchal is telling us that's not the way to live. We're supposed to want to try to love our friends like ourselves, just like we expect people to forgive us. And that's probably the best barometer. If you look at that person and say, well, what if that was me and I had made that mistake? How would I try to rectify it? What would I want your reaction? I would want you to look at me and say, listen, he made a mistake, but he means well. He wants to be a friend. Let's let bygones be bygones and move on.
Even the wording in the Torah, it doesn't say to love some politician on the other side of the world. It's talking literally about your neighbor. The English translation is actually not a very good one because re'acha is somebody that you know. So I wrote once a Dvar Torah for Parshat Bo, which is my Bar Mitzvah Parsha. I learned Rabbi Gladstein gave a class about how when Hashem tells Moshe to tell the Israelites to borrow the silver and the gold and the clothing, it says Leisha me'et reuta, from her buddy, the Egyptian, who yesterday her husband beat up her husband. Like, how did they become buddies, right? But in some way, that's the nature of what the Torah is saying. Maybe yesterday he did beat up your husband, but now we are going to leave Egypt, and so if you want to ask for silver and gold, by the way, you're not exactly borrowing it, you're taking it forever, then you have to be nice to them, and in some way, like, again, not like you said, not to invite them to your son's wedding. Actually, earlier this evening we had somebody asked about reading the Quran. I said I never read the Quran, but one of my friends who's a linguist professor told me that it says that you're not allowed to befriend a heathen, and the heathen is a Christian and a Jew. But befriend can be all kinds of things. It can be buddy, colleague, acquaintance, drinking buddy, best man, friend, best friend, right? So I don't remember the word in Arabic, but bottom line is the people here in Fredericton that I'm friendly with who are Muslims, and they told me that their understanding as Sunnis who are allowed to interpret the Quran as opposed to Shiites who don't. And they said, we're not going to invite you to our son or daughter's wedding, but we can go to have a meal together, and we can shake hands, and even there's one guy that he only allows me to hug him if there aren't any other Muslims around because he's afraid of what they'll do to him. But my stepson has very negative feelings about all Muslims, and he took me to Costco once, and this guy was there, and I said, I want to prove to my stepson that you're good people, and so we hugged right there, and he didn't look around. So yeah, that I think that's really what Re'acha is. I don't have to befriend all the people in the world, but like you said, the neighbor that you want to borrow something from, or somebody that you know from work or from school or whatever, and like you said, there is other religions that say even more extreme, but it's a standard that nobody can live by. I don't agree with what Tannenbaum said about forgiving the Nazis. It's not right. First of all, she's not a Jew, so she has no right to speak for us. But like that's not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is it's up to Hashem to do that or the other, but we have to, have good relations with our neighbors and with our and it actually tells us in the Masechet Avot, Harchek mishachen ra, right? If you have a bad neighbor and you can't change him or her, and everybody has tried, then you move away, right? So you can't make them move away. You can't start making stories up about them so that they'll be put in jail or whatever, because that leads to the other thing we talked about, lashon hara, right? So, and today's Yat Kislev, they
That's right.
accused Admiral Zaken of lies. So.
Well, thank you very much for that. Well, the next week is Hanukkah, and I'm going to be in Israel. But the week after, hope it will be. Yeah, I think it's the 21st, 22nd, something like that. Hopefully, we'll have another.
23rd. You'll be
23rd. Okay. So we'll learn again, and we'll continue with taking false oaths and meaning what you say when you say it. This will be the next topic. All right. So and have a wonderful evening. Thanks for joining. Be well.
Thank you.
Sure. You stop the recording?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, it is stopped.